She looked like a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, but her skin was pale silver and her eyes held more knowledge than any child should carry. I found her hiding in my barn on the coldest night of the year, shivering, terrified, separated from her family in a way I wouldn't understand until she showed me. And what she showed me about heaven, about what really happens when we die, about where our loved ones actually go, it destroyed everything I thought I knew. Then it rebuilt me from the ground up. This isn't about religion. This isn't about what any church teaches. This is about what a frightened child from another world revealed to a woman who had spent 15 years helping people die while secretly terrified of death herself. If you've ever lost someone, if you've ever wondered where they went, if you've ever laid awake at night hoping there's something more than just darkness waiting for us, this story will answer questions that have haunted humanity since the beginning. But I have to warn you, the truth about heaven isn't what you expect. It's bigger, stranger, and far more beautiful than any scripture ever captured. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what Ruth Callahan discovered hiding in her barn that December night didn't just change how she thought about death, it changed how she finally learned to live. Now let me tell you how it all started. Ruth Callahan had held the hands of 847 people as they died. She kept count. Not officially, just a number she tracked in her head, every soul that passed while she sat beside them, every final breath, every moment where someone was there and then suddenly wasn't. At 52, Ruth had been a hospice nurse for 15 years. Before that, she'd worked the ER at a hospital in Denver, but the emergency room was about saving people, frantic interventions, racing against the clock. Ruth discovered she was better at the other thing, the quiet thing, helping people leave. She had a gift for it. That's what everyone said. She could calm the most frightened patients. She knew when to talk and when to just be present. Families requested her specifically because Ruth made the worst moment of their lives somehow bearable. What nobody knew was that Ruth was terrified of death, not the process. She'd seen enough of that. The gasping, the stillness, the strange peace that sometimes settled on faces after. That part she could handle. What terrified her was the question of what came next. Because in 15 years of watching people die, Ruth had seen things she couldn't explain. Patients who looked at the corner of the room and smiled at someone invisible. People who spoke to relatives who'd been dead for decades. A woman who described a garden of light in her final moments, with such detail that Ruth could almost see it herself. But she'd also watched people die screaming, clawing at the sheets, eyes wide with terror at something only they could see. Which one was real? The peace or the horror? Was there anything at all on the other side, or was consciousness just a candle that got snuffed out? Ruth didn't know, and not knowing was eating her alive. She'd tried church, sat in the back pew for a few months, listening to sermons about heaven and hell, but the pastor's certainty felt hollow. He talked about eternal life like he was describing a vacation package. Ruth had watched too much actual death to accept easy answers. She'd tried therapy, a kind woman in a small office who asked about her childhood and her feelings about mortality. Ruth stopped going after the 4th session. Talking about her fear didn't make it smaller. It just gave it more oxygen. She'd tried drinking. That worked for a while. A glass of wine became 2, became a bottle, became waking up at 3 a.m. with her heart racing and the darkness pressing in. She'd quit 6 months ago, but the fear was still there, just without the numbing. Ruth lived alone on a small farm in rural Minnesota, 20 acres that had belonged to her parents. She'd moved back 3 years ago after her mother died. Her father had passed a decade before that. No siblings, never married, a few relationships that fizzled because Ruth couldn't let anyone close enough to matter. "You keep everyone at arm's length," her last boyfriend had said, "even the dying people you care for. You're there, but you're not really there." He wasn't wrong. Ruth had built walls so high she couldn't see over them anymore. Walls against connection. Walls against loss. Walls against the terror that waited whenever she let herself think too hard about what came after. The farm was her refuge, old farmhouse, barns she didn't use except for storage, fields she rented to a neighbor who grew soybeans. It was quiet, isolated, exactly what she needed to not think about the things that scared her. But December was the hardest month. The cold made everything feel closer to death. The bare trees, the frozen ground, the way the sun set at 4:30 and left hours of darkness to fill. Ruth's patience always seemed to decline faster in December, as if the dying knew the calendar was running out. This particular December had been brutal. She'd lost 4 patients in 2 weeks. Each one left her more hollow than the last. The night it happened, Ruth was sitting in her kitchen, staring at nothing. The house was cold. She'd let the fire die down without noticing. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. Snow was falling in that quiet, relentless way that meant it wouldn't stop for hours. She should go to bed. She had a patient visit in the morning. Mrs. Patterson, 94 years old, actively dying, maybe a few days left. Ruth would sit with her, hold her hand, say comforting things she wasn't sure she believed, but she couldn't move. The weight of all those deaths was pressing on her chest. 847 people, 847 final breaths, and not one of them had come back to tell her what happened next. "Where do you go?" Ruth whispered to the empty kitchen. "Where do any of you go?" The silence didn't answer. She was about to force herself up when she heard it, a sound from outside, from the direction of the barn. Ruth frowned. Nothing should be in the barn. She hadn't kept animals in years. Sometimes deer wandered onto the property, but they avoided the structures. The sound came again, a crash, like something falling, then nothing. Ruth sat very still. The logical thing was to ignore it, probably just snow sliding off the roof, or a raccoon that had found a way inside. But something made her stand. Something made her pull on her heavy coat and boots. Something made her grab the flashlight from the drawer and walk out into the bitter December night. Later, she would wonder if she'd been guided, if some force beyond her understanding had pushed her toward that barn at exactly that moment. But right then, she was just a tired, frightened woman, walking through the snow toward a sound she couldn't explain. The barn was 100 yards from the house. In summer, it was a pleasant walk. In 15 below December, it felt like crossing the Arctic. Ruth's breath came out in white clouds. The snow crunched under her boots. Her flashlight cut a narrow beam through the darkness, catching snowflakes as they fell. She reached the barn door. It was slightly open. She never left it open. "Hello," she called. Her voice sounded thin in the cold air. "Is someone in there?" Nothing. Ruth pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The barn was marginally warmer than outside, but not by much. Old hay bales, rusted equipment from her father's farming days, shadows everywhere. She swept the flashlight across the space. Nothing unusual, nothing that would explain the crash she'd heard. Then the beam caught something in the corner, behind a stack of wooden crates. A shape, small, huddled. Ruth's heart jumped. "Who's there?" The shape didn't move. She walked closer, her boots scraping on the old wooden floor. The flashlight trembled slightly in her hand. As she rounded the crates, she saw it clearly. A child. At least, that was her first thought. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, curled into a ball against the wall, wearing some kind of thin silver garment that couldn't possibly be warm enough, shivering violently. "Oh my God!" Ruth rushed forward, her nurse instincts taking over. "Honey, what are you doing out here? You'll freeze to death." She reached out to touch the child's shoulder, and then the girl looked up. Ruth stumbled backward so fast she almost fell. The face was childlike, but the skin was wrong. Pale silver, almost luminescent, with a faint shimmer beneath the surface. The features were close to human, but not quite. Slightly too symmetrical. Nose a little too small, lips thin and colorless, and the eyes, large, much larger than a human child's. Deep violet, almost purple, with no visible whites. They caught Ruth's flashlight and reflected it back like a cat's eyes in the dark. Jesus Christ! Ruth pressed her hand against her chest. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. The child, the thing, flinched at her reaction. It curled tighter into itself, making a sound that Ruth recognized despite everything. A whimper, the universal sound of a frightened child. "Please don't hurt me." The voice came from inside Ruth's head, not through her ears, inside, clear and small and terrified. Ruth stood frozen. The cold was forgotten. The logical part of her brain was screaming that this was impossible, that she was hallucinating, that she'd finally cracked under the weight of all those deaths, and her mind had shattered. But the child was shivering. real shivers. And that whimper had sounded so genuine, so vulnerable, that Ruth's maternal instincts overrode her terror. "I'm not—" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "I'm not going to hurt you." The child's violet eyes studied her, wary, desperate. "I got lost." The voice in Ruth's mind was clearer now, still young, still scared. "There was an accident. My family, I don't know where they are. I've been hiding. I'm so cold." Ruth took a slow breath, then another. She was a woman who sat with dying people for a living. She could handle strange. She could handle impossible. She could handle this. "How long have you been in here?" "I don't know. Since the light came." She meant the sun. Since the light came and then went away again. "Since this morning?" Ruth's nurse brain calculated quickly. At least 8 hours in a barn with no heat in 15 below weather. The child should be dead from hypothermia. "How are you still alive?" "My body is different from yours, but I'm still cold. So cold." The shivering intensified. Ruth saw tears forming in those impossible violet eyes. Tears that looked almost normal, almost human. Something broke through Ruth's fear. Something older and deeper. The same instinct that made her sit with dying strangers and hold their hands. The same part of her that couldn't walk away from suffering, no matter how scared she was. "Okay," Ruth said. She took off her heavy coat. "Okay, I'm going to help you." She wrapped the coat around the child's small shoulders. The silver skin was cool to the touch, but not ice cold like she expected. There was life there. Fragile life. "You're not afraid?" The child's mental voice was surprised. "I'm terrified," Ruth admitted, "but you're freezing, and you're a child, and I'm not going to leave you out here to die." She scooped the girl up, lighter than expected, like holding a bundle of feathers in air. The child stiffened at first, then relaxed into Ruth's arms. "My house is warm," Ruth said. "Can you make it that far?" "Yes." A pause, then quieter. "Thank you." Ruth carried the alien child out of the barn and into the snow. The cold hit her immediately without the coat, but she barely noticed. She was focused on the small body in her arms, the shallow breathing, the violet eyes that kept watching her face as if trying to understand. Halfway to the house, the child spoke again. "You help people die. I can feel it on you. So much death." Ruth almost stumbled. "How do you know that?" "I can sense things. It's how my people communicate. You carry the energy of many passings. Hundreds." 8:47, Ruth whispered before she could stop herself. "You count them." "Yes." "Why?" Ruth didn't have an answer. She'd never been able to explain it, even to herself. She just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, carrying something impossible through the Minnesota snow. They reached the house. Ruth managed to get the door open without dropping the child. Inside, the remnants of warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. She carried the girl to the couch near the fireplace, set her down gently. The child immediately curled toward the fading embers, seeking heat. "I'll get the fire going again." Ruth grabbed kindling and logs, working quickly. Her hands were shaking, but not from cold. "I'll make something warm to drink. Can you drink human things?" "Water." The child's eyes followed her movements. "Some of your foods. My body can adapt." The fire caught. Flames began to climb. Ruth added another log, then stepped back. In the growing firelight, she got her first real look at the child. Small, delicate. That silver skin was more visible now, almost glowing faintly in the warmth. The thin silver garment seemed to be part suit, part clothing, with no visible seams or fasteners. The child's hair was white, not blonde. White, fine as spider silk, and cut short around that too-perfect face. But despite all the alienness, the expression was achingly familiar. A lost child, a scared child, a child who wanted to go home. "What's your name?" Ruth asked. The child tilted her head. The movement was almost human. "My name is not something your voice can make, but in your language, the closest sound would be Lyra." "Lyra?" Ruth tested it. "Okay, Lyra, I'm Ruth." "Ruth." The child repeated it internally. Ruth who counts the dead. Ruth who is afraid of dying. Ruth felt exposed, naked. This creature could apparently read her like a book. Can you see everything I'm thinking?" "Not everything. Feelings mostly. Big truths you carry inside. You are very afraid. Not of me. of something else, something that waits. Death, Ruth said quietly. I'm afraid of death. Lyra's violet eyes held hers, and in them Ruth saw something unexpected. Not judgment, not confusion. Understanding. I can show you, Lyra said, what you're afraid of, what really happens. I've seen it. My people know. Ruth's heart stopped, literally felt like it stopped beating for a moment. You know what happens when we die? I know what happens when anyone dies, anywhere. It's the same. The child's mental voice carried an ancient weight that shouldn't belong to something so small. I can show you, but you might not be ready. Ruth thought about 847 people, about the ones who smiled at invisible visitors and the ones who screamed in terror, about 15 years of questions that no one could answer. Show me, she said. Please, I need to know. Lyra reached out one small silver hand. Her fingers were longer than a human child's, elegant, delicate. It might be overwhelming. What I show you, it might change everything. I don't care. Ruth's voice broke. I've been drowning in this fear my whole life. I can't do it anymore. I need to know the truth, even if it breaks me. Lyra studied her for a long moment, those violet eyes seeing things Ruth couldn't imagine. Then she nodded. Take my hand, Ruth, and I will show you where the dead go. Ruth reached out. Her fingers touched Lyra's, cool and smooth and impossibly real. The farmhouse disappeared, and Ruth Callahan finally saw what waited on the other side. Ruth was floating. No, that wasn't right. She wasn't floating. She simply was, without weight, without body, without the constant hum of physical sensations she'd never realized were always there until they weren't. She tried to scream but had no mouth, tried to look around but had no eyes. For one terrible moment, she was pure consciousness suspended in darkness, and the fear she'd carried her whole life exploded into something beyond terror. Then Lyra's voice came, calm, gentle, right beside her somehow. Don't be afraid. This is normal. You're still you, just without the container. Ruth felt herself stabilize. The panic didn't disappear, but it became manageable. She was still here, still thinking, still Ruth. Where am I? You're in the space between, where consciousness goes when it first leaves the body. Everyone passes through here. The darkness wasn't completely dark, Ruth realized. There were subtle variations, depths, textures she couldn't name, and in the distance, something that might have been light. Is this death? This is the beginning of death, the first moment. What your people call crossing over. Ruth felt a wave of vertigo without a body to feel it in. She was experiencing death, actual death, the thing she'd feared for 52 years, and she was still here. I'm still me, she thought. Yes, consciousness doesn't end, it can't end. It's the only thing in the universe that is truly permanent. Bodies are temporary containers. Consciousness is eternal. Before Ruth could process this, the darkness began to change. Light appeared. Not harsh or blinding, soft, warm, coming from everywhere and nowhere. And then she saw them. Figures, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, shapes of light that were somehow also people. She couldn't see faces, but she could feel them, their presence, their identity. What are they? Everyone who has ever died, every consciousness that has transitioned. They exist here, in this place between places. Ruth felt overwhelmed. The scale of it. The sheer number of beings. All of them? From all of history? From all of history, from all worlds. Death is not unique to Earth, Ruth. Every physical form in the universe eventually ends, and every consciousness returns here. One of the light figures moved closer. Ruth felt something familiar about it, something that made her non-existent heart ache. Mom? The figure pulsed, warm, loving, and suddenly Ruth could perceive more clearly. It was her mother, not as she'd looked at the end, wasted by cancer and barely conscious, but vital, whole, radiating a peace that Ruth had never felt from her in life. She can't communicate with you directly in this state, Lyra's voice explained. You're just visiting, but she knows you're here. She's been waiting for you to find her. Ruth felt tears that couldn't exist streaming down a face she didn't have. 15 years since her mother died. 15 years of wondering where she went, if she went anywhere at all. And here she was, still existing, still aware, still her mother. I miss you, Ruth thought, directing it toward the light. I miss you so much. The figure pulsed again, a response, not words, but pure emotion, love, comfort, the feeling of being held without arms. She knows, Lyra said gently. She's been with you more than you realize. When you sit with the dying, she's often there too, helping them cross. Ruth would have sobbed if she'd had a body. The idea that her mother had been with her this whole time, watching her do the work, helping the patients Ruth couldn't save. Why didn't I feel her? Why couldn't I sense her? Because you were looking for the wrong things. You expected voices, signs, physical evidence, but consciousness communicates through subtler channels, through feelings, through sudden knowing, through dreams you dismiss when you wake. Ruth thought about all the times she'd felt a strange peace during a patient's passing, the moments when she just knew what to say, what to do. She'd attributed it to experience, to instinct. Maybe it had been something more. The vision shifted. Ruth's mother faded back into the sea of light, and suddenly Ruth was somewhere else entirely. A garden, vast and impossible, colors she had no names for, flowers that seemed to sing rather than bloom, light that felt like love made visible. What is this place? One version of what humans call heaven, but it's not a location, it's a state of being. Consciousness creates it. Ruth didn't understand. When you die, Lyra continued, your consciousness is freed from the physical brain, and freed consciousness can create reality directly. Whatever you expect to find, whatever you truly believe awaits you, that's what you experience. So heaven is real? Heaven is as real as any other experience, but it's not one place. It's infinite places, created by infinite consciousnesses based on their beliefs, their expectations, their deepest truths. The garden around Ruth shimmered, changed. Suddenly she was in a vast library, then a mountain peak, then a beach at sunset, then something that had no earthly equivalent at all. Some souls create paradise. Others create reunions with loved ones. Others create places of learning, of growth. There's no wrong answer. Consciousness gets what it needs to evolve. But what about hell? Ruth asked, the fear that had driven her whole life. What about the people who die screaming? I've seen them, terrified of something I couldn't see. Lyra's presence seemed to grow sad. Consciousness creates what it expects. If a person truly believes they deserve punishment, they will create that experience for themselves, not because anyone is punishing them, but because guilt and fear are powerful creative forces, so they torture themselves, temporarily, until they're ready to let go of the beliefs that trap them. No soul is ever abandoned. No consciousness is ever truly lost. Eventually, even the most trapped find their way to understanding, but it can take what you would experience as a very long time. Ruth thought about the patients who died in terror, the ones who screamed about fire, about judgment, about being dragged down. They created it themselves, she realized. Their own fear manifested as exactly what they were afraid of. Yes, this is why what you believe matters so much, not because an external God is judging you, but because you are always creating your experience, even after death, especially after death. The vision shifted again. Now Ruth was in a kind of theater, watching scenes play out below her like a movie. A woman seeing her whole life from the outside, every kindness she'd shown, every cruelty, every moment she'd helped someone, every moment she'd caused pain. What is this? The life review. Every consciousness goes through it, not as judgment from above, as understanding from within. You feel everything you caused others to feel. Every joy you created, you experience as the receiver. Every wound you inflicted, you feel as the wounded. Ruth watched the woman below relive a moment of yelling at her child, and then experience that moment as the child had experienced it. The fear, the shame, the broken trust. The woman shuddered with understanding, with remorse, but there was no punishing voice, no condemnation from outside, just complete, compassionate awareness of what she had done. This is why love matters so much, Lyra said, not because of commandments or rules, but because in the life review, you become everyone you ever affected. Every act of love, you feel received. Every act of cruelty, you feel inflicted upon yourself. So karma is real? not as a system of cosmic punishment, as a system of cosmic education. You learn through experiencing the consequences of your choices, not as abstract concepts, as lived reality. Ruth thought about her own life, the walls she'd built, the people she'd kept at distance, the love she'd refused to give or receive because she was too afraid of loss. Will I feel that? When I die? The loneliness I caused? You will feel everything, but not as punishment, as information, as the understanding you need to grow. And you will also feel every hand you held, every patient you comforted, every moment of presence you offered to the dying. You will feel how much that meant to them. Ruth felt something shift inside her consciousness, a crack in the fear she'd carried so long. "Tell me about Jesus," she said. "What did he know about all this?" Lyra's presence seemed to brighten. Jesus understood what most humans have forgotten, that consciousness is eternal, that love is the creative force of the universe, that what you do to others, you literally do to yourself, because there is no true separation. So when he said, "Love your neighbor as yourself," he was being literal. Your neighbor is yourself. All consciousness is connected. The boundaries you perceive between people are illusions of physical form. When you harm another, you harm yourself. When you heal another, you heal yourself. And heaven? Ruth pressed. He talked about heaven constantly. He was trying to explain what I'm showing you now. That consciousness continues. That love creates paradise. That fear creates suffering. He spoke in metaphors because his audience couldn't understand the direct truth. What about being saved? What about accepting him to get into heaven? Lyra paused, as if choosing her next words carefully. Jesus never taught that he was the only way. He taught that his way, the path of love, forgiveness, compassion, was the way. Not because of doctrine, because of the practical reality of how consciousness works. Ruth didn't understand. Think about the life review. When you die, you experience everything you caused others to feel. If you lived in hatred, you will feel the hatred you spread. If you lived in love, you will feel the love you gave. Jesus was teaching people how to create a beautiful life review, how to die without regret, how to enter the after-death state already aligned with joy instead of suffering. So all the religion was humans trying to understand and systematize what Jesus demonstrated. They got some things right. They got many things wrong. They turned a path of love into a system of control. They made fear-based what Jesus intended to be love-based. Ruth felt the weight of this. All those dying patients who were terrified of judgment, all those people who'd been taught they were sinners deserving punishment. Their fear didn't protect them. It created exactly what they were afraid of. "How do I die without fear?" Ruth asked. "That's all I want to know. How do I get there without being terrified?" "You're already learning." Lyra's voice was warm. "You now know that consciousness continues. You've seen your mother still existing. You've understood that the experience after death is shaped by your own beliefs and expectations. But what should I believe? What should I expect? Expect love. Expect reunion. Expect understanding. Not because someone commanded you to believe these things, but because when you expect them, you create them. Your beliefs are not just opinions, they are creative forces. And if I'm wrong, if there's nothing after all, then you will have lived with less fear and more love. Either way, you win. But you're not wrong, Ruth. I'm showing you what my people have known for millennia, what every advanced consciousness in the universe has discovered. Death is not an ending, it is a transition. And what waits on the other side is shaped by what you carry within. The vision began to fade, the lights dimmed. Ruth felt herself being pulled back toward something heavy, something physical. "Wait," she said. "I have more questions. So many more questions. We have time. I'm not going anywhere tonight." The farmhouse materialized around her, solid, real. Ruth was back in her body, sitting on the floor beside the couch where Lyra lay. Their hands were still touching. Ruth gasped, sucked in air like she'd been underwater. Her body felt heavy after the lightness of pure consciousness, clumsy, limited. "That was real," she said out loud. Her voice was hoarse. "That was actually real." Lyra nodded. Her violet eyes glowed softly in the firelight. "As real as anything you've ever experienced. More real, in some ways. Physical reality is the dream. Consciousness is what's permanent. Ruth looked at her hands, solid, wrinkled, aging, the container, Lyra had called it. My mother, Ruth whispered. She's really still there. She's been there this whole time, waiting for you, loving you, proud of the work you do with the dying. She helps them, you know, on the other side. She meets them when they cross. Tears streamed down Ruth's face, real tears now, wet and warm. I've been so scared, my whole life, every single day, this terror underneath everything, and it was all based on misunderstanding, yes. But you didn't know. How could you? Your culture doesn't teach the truth about death. It teaches fear because fear is useful for control. Ruth wiped her face. Her mind was racing, everything she'd believed, everything she'd worried about, reshuffling into new patterns. The patients who die peacefully, she said slowly, they believe something good is waiting. Yes, and so they create something good. Their expectation opens the door to the experience that matches it. And the ones who die terrified, their fear creates what they're afraid of, temporarily, until they can release it. How long is temporarily? There is no time as you understand it in the non-physical realm, but in human terms it can feel like years, decades, even longer for those who are very attached to their suffering. But no one is ever abandoned. Eventually, every consciousness finds its way home. Ruth stood up. Her legs were shaky. She walked to the window and looked out at the snow falling in the darkness. Everything changes now, she said. I can't unsee what you showed me. No, you can't. When I sit with dying patients tomorrow, I'll know what's waiting for them. I'll know there's nothing to be afraid of. And that knowing will help them. Your certainty will be a gift you can offer. Not through words, necessarily. Through presence. Through the peace you carry. Ruth turned back to look at Lyra, the alien child curled on her couch, so small, so strange, so impossibly real. Why are you here, Lyra? Really? Why did you crash on my farm? Why show me all this? Lyra's violet eyes met hers. I told you. I was separated from my family. My ship malfunctioned. I landed where I could survive. But there are no accidents in the universe, Ruth. I landed here because you were ready to see. Because your fear had reached the point where you were finally willing to let it go. And your family, how do we find them? They will come for me. When the window opens again, tomorrow night, if my calculations are correct. Tomorrow night, Ruth repeated. So I have you for one more day. Yes. Ruth walked back to the couch. She sat down on the floor, close to Lyra, like sitting with a patient, like keeping vigil. Then teach me more, she said. Everything you can in the time we have. I need to understand. Lyra's small silver hand reached out and touched Ruth's weathered one. What do you want to know? Everything. How consciousness works, why we come to physical bodies, what Jesus really taught, what happens to children who die, what happens to people who die suddenly without warning, everything. These are big questions. Lyra's mental voice was gentle, but we have until tomorrow night. And you are ready to hear. Ruth settled in. The fire crackled. Snow fell outside the window. And in the small farmhouse in rural Minnesota, a hospice nurse who had spent her life afraid of death began to learn what it actually meant to be alive. Lyra started with the basics. Physical life is a school. Your planet, every planet with physical beings, they're all classrooms. Consciousness chooses to enter physical form to learn things it can't learn any other way. Like what? Limitation, time, consequences, the experience of separation. In the non-physical realm, consciousness is connected to everything. You know you're part of the whole. There's no fear because there's no death. No stakes because everything is eternal. That sounds like paradise. It is paradise, but paradise doesn't promote growth. You don't build strength in comfort. You build strength through challenge. Ruth frowned. So physical life is supposed to be hard? Physical life is supposed to be a teaching environment. Challenges are lessons. Pain is information. Every difficult experience carries potential growth, if you're willing to find it. That sounds harsh. Only from the perspective of someone in the middle of it. After death, in the life review, every challenge makes sense. You see why you experienced what you experienced. You feel the growth it created. What seemed like tragedy becomes understood as education. But children who die young, babies, what could they possibly learn? Different souls come for different lessons. Some need only a brief experience, a taste of physical form. Others come specifically to teach the humans around them through their birth, their illness, their death. No life is wasted, Ruth, no matter how short. Ruth thought about the babies she'd watched die in the NICU during her hospital years, the parents destroyed by grief, the seeming senselessness of it. The parents learn something too? The parents learn about love that transcends circumstance, about strength they didn't know they had, about the preciousness of every moment. These are lessons that can only come through loss. The souls of those children volunteered for that role. Volunteered? Before physical birth, consciousness chooses its life circumstances, not every detail, but the major parameters, the family, the challenges, the key relationships, the approximate length of life. It's all agreed upon. Nobody would choose suffering. You would be surprised. From the perspective of eternal consciousness, a lifetime of suffering is a brief education, a hard semester in an infinite school. Souls choose difficult lives, specifically because those lives offer the most growth in the shortest time. Ruth's head was spinning. Everything she thought she knew about why bad things happened to good people, why life was unfair, why children died and monsters lived to old age, all of it rearranging. What about evil people? People who cause massive suffering? Did their victims agree to that? This is more complex. There is free will in physical reality. Not every detail is predetermined. Evil exists because consciousness must be free to choose, or choice has no meaning. But even evil serves the larger purpose. How can evil serve any purpose? It teaches, it clarifies, it shows what doesn't work. Consciousness learns through contrast. You can't fully understand light without experiencing darkness. You can't know love without knowing its absence. Ruth shook her head. That's easy to say when you're not the one suffering. You're right. From inside the experience, it can seem unbearable. But here's what I want you to understand, Ruth. Physical life is not the whole story. It's one chapter. And consciousness cannot be permanently damaged by any physical experience. Whatever happens in the body, the essence remains untouched. That doesn't make suffering hurt less. No, it doesn't. But it gives suffering meaning. It places it in a context where it becomes bearable, endurable, even eventually valuable. The fire was dying down. Ruth added more wood. The warmth spread through the room. Tell me about Jesus again, she said. Tell me what he really knew. Jesus was a consciousness that had evolved far beyond the need for physical incarnation. He chose to return to Earth during a critical period of human development, to demonstrate truths that were desperately needed. What truths? That death is not real, that love is the fundamental force of creation, that forgiveness releases the one who forgives more than the one who is forgiven, that you are not separate from God, you are expressions of the same source. But the churches teach that we're sinners, that we need saving. Jesus never taught original sin. He never taught that you were born broken and needed an external force to fix you. He taught that the kingdom of heaven is within, that you are already connected to the source, that you have simply forgotten. Then where did all the guilt and sin stuff come from? From humans who built institutions after Jesus died. They needed people to depend on them. If you are already whole, if you can access God directly, what do you need a priest for? So they invented a problem, original sin, and sold themselves as the solution. Ruth thought about all the dying patients who begged for priests, who needed last rites to feel safe, who believed until their final breath that they were unworthy of love. They manipulated people's fear of death. Death is the ultimate leverage. If you control what people believe about death, you control how they live. The churches understood this. Make people terrified of what comes after, and they will do anything you tell them to escape punishment. But you're saying there is no punishment, just the life review, just experiencing what you caused others to feel. Yes, and that is enough. No external punishment is necessary. True understanding of the harm you caused, felt from the inside, is more transformative than any hell could be. But it leads to growth, not eternal suffering. So everyone eventually makes it to heaven? Even the worst people? Everyone eventually returns to source, even the worst. The path may be long, the learning may be hard, but consciousness cannot be permanently lost. Love is the nature of reality. Everything that seems like not love is temporary confusion that eventually resolves. Ruth was quiet for a long moment, processing, integrating. "What do I do with this?" she finally asked. "This knowledge, this experience, how do I live with it?" You live more freely, you fear less, you love more openly. And when you sit with the dying, you carry this truth like a candle. You can't always speak it directly. Some aren't ready to hear, but you can radiate it. You can be living proof that death is nothing to fear. Will I remember this? Tomorrow? Next week? Next year? Will it fade? Some details will fade, but the core transformation will remain. You have seen behind the curtain. That changes consciousness permanently. You will never be as afraid as you were before. The foundation of your fear has been removed. Lyra's eyes were growing heavy. Whatever energy the alien child had used to show Ruth the visions was taking its toll. "Rest now, Ruth. We have more to discuss tomorrow. But you need to sleep. Your body has been through something significant." Ruth didn't want to sleep. She wanted to keep asking questions forever. But Lyra was right. Her body was exhausted in ways she'd never felt before. She got blankets from the closet, covered Lyra gently, added one more log to the fire. Then she sat in the chair beside the couch, close enough to touch, like keeping vigil with a dying patient. Except this time, she wasn't watching death approach. She was watching something else entirely. Something she couldn't name yet. Ruth closed her eyes, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she wasn't afraid to sleep. Because now she knew that whatever waited on the other side of consciousness, it wasn't darkness, it was home. Ruth woke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she didn't remember. Then it all came flooding back, the barn, the child, the visions of what lay beyond death. She sat up quickly, looked at the couch. Lyra was still there, still breathing. Those violet eyes opened and found Ruth's face. "You slept peacefully?" For the first time in a long time. Ruth realized it was true. No nightmares, no waking at 3 a.m. with her heart racing. Just deep, dreamless rest. "I have a patient this morning," Ruth said. "Mrs. Patterson, she's dying." Lyra nodded. "Then go to her. You have something to offer now that you didn't have before." Ruth showered, made coffee, moved through her morning routine in a daze. Everything looked the same. Her kitchen, her coat by the door, her car keys on the hook. But nothing felt the same. She drove to Mrs. Patterson's house. The old woman was in a hospital bed in the living room. Her daughter sat beside her, exhausted from weeks of watching her mother fade. "How is she?" Ruth asked. "Worse. She keeps talking about people who aren't there. My father, her sister. I don't know if it's the medication or—" "It's not the medication," Ruth said quietly. She sat beside Mrs. Patterson's bed, took the old woman's frail hand. Those clouded eyes opened and found Ruth's face. "There's a garden," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "I keep seeing it. So beautiful." Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. "I know. I've seen it too." The old woman's face changed, surprise, then recognition, then peace. "You know," she breathed. "You really know. There's nothing to be afraid of. What's waiting for you is more beautiful than anything here. Your husband is there, your sister, everyone you've lost. They're waiting." Mrs. Patterson's grip tightened on Ruth's hand. "How do you know?" Ruth couldn't explain, not in words that would make sense, so she just held on and let the certainty flow through her touch, the peace she'd found, the truth she'd seen. Mrs. Patterson smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I was so scared." "I know, I was too, but we don't have to be, not anymore." Mrs. Patterson died that afternoon, peacefully, without fear. Her daughter said it was like watching someone fall asleep. One moment she was there, the next she simply wasn't. But Ruth knew better. She wasn't gone. She'd just walked through a door. That evening, Ruth returned home to find Lyra standing at the window, watching the sky. "They're coming. Tonight. I can feel them getting closer." Ruth's heart sank. She'd known this was temporary, but she wasn't ready to let go. "Will I ever see you again?" Lyra turned. Those violet eyes held more warmth than Ruth had ever seen in them. You see me every time you look at the stars, every time you sit with someone who is dying and help them release their fear, every time you remember what I showed you. I will be there. That's not the same. No, it isn't. But physical presence was never the point. Connection is the point. And we are connected now, Ruth, permanently, across any distance. They stood together as darkness fell. Ruth made dinner. Lyra ate a little, watching Ruth with those ancient eyes in that child's face. I don't know how to thank you, Ruth said. Live without fear. That is enough thanks. I'm going to try. You will do more than try. You have been transformed. You cannot go back to who you were. Near midnight, the sky lit up, not lightning, something else. A soft glow that grew brighter, then resolved into a shape. A craft, similar to what Ruth imagined Lyra's had looked like before it crashed. It descended silently into the field behind the barn. Lyra walked to the door. Ruth followed. Outside, the craft had landed. A doorway opened, spilling warm light. Figures stood inside, tall and silver, like Lyra, but full-grown. My family. Lyra's mental voice was filled with joy and relief. They found me. Ruth knelt in the snow so she was eye level with the alien child. Go, they're waiting. Lyra reached out and touched Ruth's face. Her small silver hand was warm now. Remember what I showed you. Share it when you can. Live it always. Death is not an ending. Love is not lost. And you are never, ever alone. Then she turned and walked toward the ship. The adult figures embraced her. Ruth caught a glimpse of the reunion, the relief, the love that transcended species. Lyra looked back one last time. Those violet eyes met Ruth's across the snowy field. Then the doorway closed, the craft rose silently, and in seconds it was gone. Just stars and snow and silence. Ruth stood there for a long time, freezing, crying, but not from sadness, from gratitude. The months that followed were different. Ruth kept working hospice. But something had shifted in how she did it. Patients felt it. Families felt it. There was a peace around her now that hadn't been there before. She stopped keeping count of the deaths. The number didn't matter anymore. What mattered was presence, connection, helping people cross without fear. She started talking more openly about what might wait on the other side. Not preaching, not pushing, just gentle mentions when patients seemed ready. I believe there's something beautiful waiting, she would say. I believe the people you love are already there. Some patients dismissed it, but many held on to her words like a lifeline, and more of them died peacefully than ever before. Ruth's sister noticed the change. You're different, she said during a visit. Lighter, like you put down something heavy. I did, Ruth said. I put down fear. Fear of what? Everything, but mostly death. Her sister didn't understand, but that was okay. Ruth couldn't explain what had happened in a way that would make sense. She could only live it. A year after Lyra left, Ruth was sitting on her porch watching the stars when she felt something. A warmth, a presence. Familiar. Mom, she thought, no answer in words, but a feeling of love so strong it brought tears to her eyes, and then another presence beside the first one. Her father, both of them, right there with her. Ruth closed her eyes and let herself feel them, really feel them, not as memory, as reality. I love you, she whispered. I'll see you again someday. The warmth intensified, agreement, promise. Then gently faded. Ruth opened her eyes. The stars were brighter than she'd ever seen them, and somewhere out there, a child with silver skin and violet eyes was telling her family about the human woman who rescued her on a frozen night, the woman who had been so afraid of death, until she learned what death actually was. Ruth Callahan spent 52 years terrified of dying. One night with a lost alien child erased that fear forever, not because she chose to believe something comforting, because she saw it, she experienced it. She touched the truth with her own consciousness and brought it back. Death is not an ending, it never was. It's a door. And what waits on the other side is not darkness or judgment or oblivion. It's home. The people you've lost are not gone. They're waiting. They see you. They love you still. The separation you feel is temporary. The reunion is certain. And how you live now matters. Not because some angry God is keeping score, but because you will feel everything you caused others to feel. Every kindness will return to you as joy. Every cruelty will return as understanding. This is why love matters. This is why Jesus taught what he taught. You don't have to wait until death to know this. You can start living it now. Let go of fear. Choose love. Forgive the people who hurt you, not for their sake, but because holding on to pain only extends your own suffering. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment. Tell me about someone you've lost. Tell me about your own fear of death. Tell me if you've ever sensed a presence you couldn't explain. And if you're ready for more stories that pull back the curtain on what we think we know, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because Ruth Callahan isn't the only one who discovered the truth about what waits beyond. There are more stories to tell, and the truth is bigger than any of us imagined.